Okay, guys, so this presentation is just to run through some of the background information for Lord of the Flies, which is the novel that you will be reading. I want to remind you that there is the full text of Lord of the Flies on Google Classroom under the extra materials heading and under that topic. There is also an audio version, a full audio version of Lord of the Flies. And I will also post text and audio versions of each chapter every week if you just want to go chapter by chapter. But you're always welcome to read ahead, and you are always welcome to work on your study guide as necessary. The full study guide will also be posted online. So what's due today is just the background information, so that's all I'm going to do. But you are free to move ahead to chapter 1 whenever you are ready. Just go to Google Classroom for those materials. Okay. Right. So the author of Lord of the Flies is a man named William Golding. Mr. Golding served in the Royal Navy during World War II. Okay, and I'm sure you guys know from studying World War II in other classes that World War II was particularly devastating for England and all of Europe. And because William Golding saw many terrible things in his experiences during war, it left him with a very grim view of people in general, of humanity. He believed that without rules of society, without law and order, that people would kind of just devolve into violence and chaos. And so that's pretty much what happens in this novel. Even though Lord of the Flies is set during World War II, it doesn't specifically address World War II. It's actually about children on a deserted island. But the experiences that the children have on the island very much are about how when society breaks down, when governments break down, people tend to be the worst versions of themselves. They devolve into chaos and violence. Lord of the Flies was published in 1954, long after World War II ended. So it's a reflection on his past experiences. Okay, and just as a reminder, guys, as I am reading through these slide presentations, don't forget to update your study guides. You can always pause this presentation if you need to write. Okay, and just come back and follow along, write your answers as you go. All right, so what is the plot of Lord of the Flies? Basically, Lord of the Flies opens as a group of schoolboys are stranded on an island. They're somewhere in the Pacific. We don't know exactly why they were in the Pacific, flying over the Pacific. We don't know how their plane crashed, but presumably this is a group of schoolboys from London that was evacuated, which was a common occurrence. Children were evacuated to safer places in Europe. Again, it's not clear why they're in the Pacific. We don't see the plane crash happens, but most likely the plane was shot down in some way as a result of being in the air during the war, and it has crashed. The story opens with two of the young boys who have survived the crash just sort of walking along the island, getting their bearings. There are no adults that survive the plane crash, which is unusual. We don't see any of the adults that presumably were in the plane with the children. The pilot has not survived. The children themselves don't seem all that upset that there are no adults with them. And they are also totally unscathed from the crash. They have no physical problems from the crash. They haven't been injured in any way. They're totally fine, which again makes the opening chapter very unrealistic. It's not supposed to be realistic. You just have to accept that these boys have been dropped from the sky with no adults to set rules or police them in any way. They've just been set on this island alone. All right. Now, soon the boys devolve into what William Golding called savagery. They forget about rules. They forget about being kind to each other. They forget about their responsibilities. And pretty soon the bullies among the group start to take over. And that is what Golding saw as what happened in Europe, that democracies broke down, civilizations broke down, and political leaders like Hitler were able to take control because they had the force to do it, and people were afraid. And those two elements allow for civilization and respect and things like that all to break away. The book is, again, based on some of the real life experiences of violence that Golding had during World War II. So keep in mind, this is a book about young children and bullies and followers and all of the problems that those kids have with no adults to set the rules. But it's all there to symbolize the events of World War II. Okay, what are the major themes of Lord of the Flies? Okay, so civilization, what it means to have rules and order, versus what Golding calls savagery, okay, or every man for himself, basically. Because it's a story about young children, this is going to be about the loss of innocence. When they first get to the island, they think it's wonderful. There are no adults. Yay, they don't have to follow any rules at all. And they soon learn in their innocence, just how naive they were. They soon see why adults were necessary, why they needed rules and order in order to survive. So any story where a child kind of grows up in some ways about a loss of innocence. Okay, it's also about human tendency towards self-destruction. Okay, we are sometimes our own worst enemies and destroy ourselves under terrible circumstances. Leaders and followers, rational versus irrational behavior. Rational meaning, thought out scientific versus behavior that has no basis in fact. And mob mentality. Okay, and mob mentality means that people behave differently in large groups than they would by themselves. Sometimes you get all caught up in the people around you, you forget to make decisions for yourself. So this book has that idea in it as well. Okay, so you can shorten these on your study guide and just write down what you need to here, but I need you to remember these characters because they are the main boys in the book. Okay, first is Ralph. He represents civilization. He tries to recreate the order of society until they're rescued. He's more democratic. He's elected by the boys because he's the biggest and the strongest and the most likable. So he's kind of a natural leader. Jack represents the more barbaric kind of a leader. He's a bully. He is prone to selfish behavior. He likes to hunt, but he doesn't want to do any other jobs. And he is Ralph's main rivalry. So Ralph represents democracy. Jack represents more of a dictatorship, like Germany had in World War II. Simon is the only truly good character. He is kind and generous with others. He's the opposite of Jack's evil personality. He is also he is also what we would call more of a spiritual kind of character. He has a tendency to appreciate nature in the ways that other characters can't. Some of the boys, their first instinct would be to just destroy the island. Others, just like Simon, they kind of see the beauty of it, and his inclination is not to destroy. The opposite. Piggy represents physically, he's very vulnerable. He's overweight. He has asthma. He has very poor eyesight. So he's quite vulnerable on the island when it comes to bullies. but he's also very intellectual. He's the smartest one. He represents science and intellectualism. Roger is what we would call a sadist. A sadist is somebody who inflicts pain on others for fun. He gets pleasure out of watching other people in pain. Jack is a bully because he wants power and he's selfish. Roger just likes to hurt people. And of course, Roger gravitates more towards Jack because Jack will let him do whatever he wants. Okay, so some terms here. For utopian fiction, you only need to know that utopian fiction holds up an ideal version of society. In the beginning, it seems like the island is a utopia. It seems perfect and beautiful, all fun all the time. A dystopian piece of literature holds up a nightmarish version of our society in order to criticize us. So at first, the island looks like a utopia, but it eventually becomes a dystopia when the boys become so violent and they break down so completely that that children start getting hurt and even more terrible things happen. Okay. Right. Okay. So protagonists in dystopian literature often recognize the problems of their worlds where others are oblivious. Okay. And our protagonists usually fight the norms of a dystopia. Okay. So a good example of that would be the Hunger Games, where Katniss has to fight against her terrible world where children kill each other. And we'll maybe talk about Hunger Games as well, because it's very much connected and even in a lot of ways based on the Lord of the Flies. Okay, other terms here. Allegory, you just need to write these definitions down. An allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. Okay, so everything in this story, Lord of the Flies, is meant to represent World War II. A motif is a recurrent thematic or symbolic element in an artistic or literary work. So if you think about a room, like my son's room, when he was born, we did a SpongeBob theme in his room. So there were SpongeBob characters all over the room, on the walls, on the curtains, in the picture frames, on the bedding. So my son had a SpongeBob motif because it happened over and over again. In Lord of the Flies, there will be other motifs. Okay, images of violence, images of terror. Okay, all the symbols connected to those ideas reappearing over and over again. Okay, and an illusion, I know you can't see that. Let's see if I can. Okay, an illusion is an instance of indirect reference. Okay, so when you're alluding to something, you're indirectly referring to it. This whole book is an allusion, again, to World War II. Okay. All right, so that is all we need to do right now. I know you guys on your study guide, you have one more term called Christ figure, but we will get back to that later when we cover Simon in more detail. So for now, you can just stop writing your terms down, and that's it for today. Okay, just make sure that your study guide is completed, and we will continue this in the next class.